So why does the hydrogen jump ship, so to speak? Well, it's because the oxygen has two lone pairs. Oxygen starts off with 6 electrons in its valence shell. It forms two bonds, essentially shares 2 electrons, so that it ends up with 8 in its valence shell. And, well, hey, each of these is a pair. Where's the other 4? They're hanging out there. So, those can pick up a hydrogen by coordinate bonding. So, one molecule donates both electrons to form a covalent bond with another particle. And here, well, both electrons end up going to the oxygen. Now for acids and bases, here we have some common substances. Hydrochloric acid, HCl, is labeled at pH 0. That kind of requires that it be 1 molar or 1 mole per liter. And that assumes that it dissociates completely. In practice, this does not actually occur. And you have gastric fluid at anywhere between pH 1 to 3, depending on circumstances. Cola drinks, some acid rain, and lemon juice are rated at pH 2, which is why colas are not exactly good for the teeth. Vinegar, wine, beer, and oranges are actually less acidic. In fact, they have 10 times less hydronium concentration compared to cola, which is pretty impressive given that we know that if we put an egg into vinegar, it can leach away all the calcium in the eggshell. So, holding cola in one's mouth for extended periods of time, or having it in one's mouth in general, is not necessarily the best idea for one's teeth, yeah? Okay, so pH is equal to negative log of hydronium concentration. And this is in mole per liter. So pH 7, this is 25 degrees, has neutral water, at hydronium concentration equals 10 to the negative 7 mole per liter. Different temperatures have different ionization constants for water. So tomatoes are about pH 4-ish. Tomatoes actually may vary, just like everything else, because let me assure you that different vinegars will end up varying in pH depending on their actual acid concentrations and what you started with. Why? Oh, hey guys, let's take apple juice and make vinegar from it. Hey, if you expect that to be less acidic than apple juice, well, that kind of depends on the types of apples you're working with, because as we well know, apples vary in acidity. Okay, now for black coffee, that's also acidic. Bread is mildly acidic, 5-ish. Typical rainwater is generally supposed to be around 5.5. Any less than pH 5-ish is considered acid rain, depending on region. Some regions are stricter than others. Urine can be anywhere from 5 to 7. It is an important part of regulating the pH of blood. Now, milk is slightly acidic, and blood is slightly basic. Pure water only has pH 7 at 25 degrees Celsius, as we mentioned. Egg whites, slightly basic. Baking soda, a bit more basic. And then you have phosphate detergents, bleach, milk of magnesia, household ammonia. The smell of ammonia is very strong. It is toxic. It is the smell you smell when urine breaks down. Urea can be broken down into ammonia. And, well, ammonia used to be one of the things people would use for refrigerants. Propane was another refrigerant in the early days of refrigeration. Now, does anybody have an idea as to the pros and cons of both? Well, propane, if you have a leak in the refrigeration system, it has a tendency to explode, especially given that smoking was viewed as cool, more or less, back in the days of early refrigeration, and remained cool until the 1950s, when tobacco companies started paying scientists to published reports and papers that said that smoking did not cause lung cancer, even though they knew perfectly well that it did. So, ammonia. Why might you not want to use ammonia as a refrigerant? I mean, compared to propane, at least ammonia, when it leaks, you smell it right away. So why might people not like ammonia too much as a refrigerant? Okay guys, the air conditioner broke, and now the whole house smells like old pee. Wow, very nice. Yeah, really. No, obviously not. So that's why people went and invented things like Freon, which ended up being much worse than ammonia, if you think of environmental impacts. After all, ammonia is perfectly natural. You can find it in, well, everywhere in nature. The human body actually produces ammonia even though it's toxic. What happens to it? Well, it gets processed into urea, which is considerably less toxic and can therefore be excreted without using too much water. Uric acid, the stuff used by birds and many reptiles, that stuff is even less toxic, as in it can be excreted in even higher concentration. And it is the white paste stuff that you find when birds decide to redecorate statues, for example. Okay, so ammonia is common in nature. It can be used as fertilizer. Anhydrous ammonia is used as fertilizer because it provides nitrogen that plants need. All right, so it's pretty basic. And then you get stuff like oven cleaner and sodium hydroxide. And this is presumed to be 1 mole per liter. 1 mole per liter of OH minus ion corresponds at 25 degrees Celsius due to the autoionization constant of water to H plus being at 10 to the negative 14 moles per liter. Oven cleaner is very corrosive, and one should not expose oneself to it without sufficient protection. Now, strong and weak acids and bases, about 10% of ammonia will form ammonium ion in water. So that would be NH3 plus H2O gives us NH4 plus OH minus. Only about 1.3% of acetic acid will ionize in water. So plus H2O, and we end up with O minus plus H3O plus. For neutralization reactions, well, what happens when we put an acid and a base together? We get water and a salt. If you have hydroxide and hydrogen ion provided, this would give us NaCl plus H2O. Now obviously, if we are dealing with something like calcium hydroxide, then we would need 2 HCl because the other hydroxide doesn't just disappear into nowhere. And the other chlorine you'd need, the other chloride ion, it doesn't just appear out of nowhere either. So, neutralization reactions will produce a salt and water if, as in ionic compound. Salt is a term that is sometimes used to refer to ionic compounds in general, not necessarily table salt as is here. So this happens if you have the components you need to make water. Now you could also end up with other components, such as, well, when you add vinegar to baking soda, whoa, it foams. Why? Bicarbonate ion, or CO3 2-, so carbonate ion plus protons, or plus hydronium, will give you H2CO3, carbonic acid. And carbonic acid, you can't have a very high concentration of it in a given aqueous, so watery solution, unless you have it under high pressure, which is why when you open a bottle of pop, it will fizz. So what happens? Well, often you end up with H2O plus CO2. So for neutralization reactions, we add acids and bases together, and we end up with something that's less acidic or basic than what we started with. That's the broadest strokes. Now for buffers. Buffers are chemicals that compensate for pH changes in a solution by accepting or donating H+ ions. Wait a second, we just said earlier that bicarbonate, HCl3- can potentially be, CO3 2-. So what can it do? Well, it can take a proton to become H2Cl3, or it can release a proton, and then it becomes CO3 2-. So we can clearly see that bicarbonate can function as a buffer. It can compensate for pH changes, so reduce them, by accepting or donating hydrogen ions. Now yes, we do have stuff like Lewis acids and bases that operate on a somewhat different principle. And, well, non-Arrhenius, so Bronsted-Lowry, but that's something we can deal with in chemistry class. For biology class, we need the broad strokes, such as, well, in summary, water forms a lattice structure in liquid water and ice. The lattice structure is constantly shifting in liquid water, so the bonds are constantly being broken and reformed, and in ice it is relatively stable. So the solids, they have particles that vibrate in place, more or less. Liquid particles move over one another. The hydrogen bonding of water molecules gives water high surface tension. It also gives it high heat capacity. As polar molecules or charged ions dissolve, they will be surrounded by a shell of water molecules. This is called a hydration shell. This will cause the dipoles of water to bond appropriately to the polar or charged particle. And then what? Well, this hydration shell pries it out of the main crystalline mass of, say, salt. So this reduces the electrostatic interactions between the ions in the salt crystal, and, well, since the force of this water shell prying it out is sufficient, the particles come loose. So in this case, ions, but it could be something else, such as, Well, let's put some sugar into water and see what happens. Ooh, it dissolves. So it pries it out of, say, the sugar crystal. So those aren't ions, because water dissolves polar molecules just fine. Non-polar molecules, though, not so much. Now, the proper pH of cells inside living organisms is critical for the survival of said organisms. As we probably know, vinegar solutions are pretty decent at preserving, say, pickled vegetables. Although there are bacteria and archaea that are good with acids, or can live in very basic environments depending on their specific adaptations. But, well, those are not the majority. They are a very small minority. Strong acids and bases will dissociate essentially completely in water. This is as far as biology cares. In chemistry, you get into dissociation coefficients and stuff. Weak acids and bases will only dissociate partially. And by partially, we mean very small partially. Acids and bases will react to form water and a salt in neutralization reactions. Now, it could also release something else, such as, well, if you're dealing with bicarbonate or carbonates, it could also release carbon dioxide as a gas. A buffer is a weak acid or base that can compensate for changes in a solution to maintain the proper pH level that we happen to want for, say, a particular experiment. Well, that's it for this section, and we can talk more about some of the chemistry of life in the next section. See you later.